Hi guys, this video is going to cover two things, or two main areas. The first is how to add lights or a light to your scene, and then the second is how to render a Playblast using that light so that the visual quality or the aesthetic is a little bit higher quality than the default Maya lighting. All right, so as you can see here, this is my basic ball bounce that I've done, and so let's say I'm happy with where it's at and I want to render out a play blast. So the first thing that I want to do though is to create a light so that I get a little bit better lighting. So the first step of creating a light is just go to Create, Lights, Spotlight, or actually you can see that there's multiple types of lights here. The one that I'll be using is called a spotlight just because it's easier to dial in some of the parameters and get nice results. Okay, so when you click that, it might not look like a light has been made, but that's because it generated it at world space 000. So right now, this light is actually located here. You can see it. The other thing that you need to make sure to have turned on so that you can see that you have a light in your scene is under Show. Make sure that here, if you've clicked off a bunch of things just so that it's easier to do animation, make sure that lights are turned on. Lights are located right here. So if that's turned on, you can see the little representation of what my light is down here. Now, a couple of things to note about this. The size of this little display doesn't really mean anything. It's just giving you an indication of where the light's coming from and the angle that the light has. So if I go into the attribute editor for this light, so my light is selected and I've selected the attribute editor, you can see here that it says Spotlight Shape. And when you do that, you're able to modify several of the parameters that are on the light. One of them is the intensity, one of them the cone angle, the penumbra angle, and the drop off. So if I, in my viewport, turn on lights, you can see here, that's the little use all lights button. Now, the only area that's illuminated is kind of related here to this light that I've just made. So if I change the angle of the light, you can see that it's updating where it's shining. You can also update the cone angle here, spread it out. You can update the penumbra angle, which kind of makes the edge a little fuzzier and a little more natural. And then the drop off indicates like how long it takes for the light to stop illuminating. I wouldn't mess with this too much. You can see that in essence, it makes it dimmer, and that's because the light is getting less intense as it goes through space. But we're not going to worry about that. We're going to leave it at 0 so that it just goes on forever, and it's going to be able to light our scene a little bit easier. So with my mouse over the main viewport, if I tap spacebar, it's going to toggle between the 4 views or whichever view you want. So alternatively, over here, you can see there's this quad view button. So if you've clicked that and you hover your mouse over any of these other ones and you hit spacebar, it's going to make that the full screen view. Okay, but I like using this for doing placement of objects often just because I don't have to pivot around as much in the perspective view to get what I want. So I can move my light kind of in the middle of the scene here, and then using the top view, I'll pull it over this way, and then I'll also rotate it like that so that we're shining kind of in the middle. So now that I have my light in a decent position, maybe I'll pick it up a little bit more, up and away like that. I'll adjust my cone angle so that it covers pretty much the whole stage here. And now you can see that my ball is illuminated, the floor is illuminated the entire time that I'm going through. So the few other options that kind of boost the visual quality of your viewport render are up here. The first one is right next to where it says use all lights. You can turn on shadows. So when you turn that on, now you can see that as my ball gets close, it's casting a shadow. And you can control what your shadow looks like a little bit here in the attribute editor of each of the lights. So each light can cast a unique shadow if you want it to. So with my light selected, I'll come over here to Spotlight Shape, make sure that's selected underneath of the attribute editor. And then here, there's the drop-down tab for shadows. So if you drop that down, I recommend not turning depth map shadows on. It's just a little easier to use the default shadows out of the gate. Later you can turn that on, and this provides a little bit more customization. But just using the basic shadow is fine. I tend to just kind of dial down the shadow color so that it's not so intense. You can go all the way to white, and that basically makes it disappear. But just giving a little hint of a shadow, I think, adds a lot to kind of the believability of what's going on. Cool. So the next button that you can click on is called Screen Space Ambient Occlusion. So when you flip that on, as objects get closer to one another, you'll see like a little bit of a shadow. This shadow has nothing to do with light. So in fact, if you were to turn off your lights and you zoom in, you can see here that as the ball's gotten close to the ground, there's a little bit of a shadow, and that is independent of lighting. So it's just as objects get closer to one another, it's kind of faking a little bit of a shadow, which kind of helps silhouette and different areas of the composition pop a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to flip my light back on. Now I have my light. I've adjusted my light parameters. I've turned on lighting in my viewport. I've turned on shadows, and I've turned on screen space ambient occlusion. If I hit play, I feel like that's looking pretty good. All right, so now I'm ready to render out a Playblast. So the first step that I'm going to do is make sure that I only have visible the things that I want in my Playblast. That is basically just going to be polygons. So I just want this base visible, and I want my ball visible, and that's it. To make that happen, you can come in here to Show and say None. Turns everything off, and that's just visibility, that's not deleting anything. As you can see over here in the outliner, everything still exists. If I go to Show and say Polygons, then only polygons are visible. So now when I hit play, I just see my animation without controls. It looks a little bit cleaner, a little more finished. Okay, so the final step for getting a Playblast is just telling Maya what you want, what type of Playblast you want. Okay, so if you, sorry, I went a little quick there. If you right-click on your timeline and you find the bottom option is called Playblast, you go over to the right and you click the options box. You can see that you have a couple different things that you can modify. I would leave it all mostly default. I think actually by default this is the setup. AVI just is a non-compressed video, so I would recommend doing QuickTime. If QuickTime is not available, then I haven't been able to find any documentation on why that would be. So we can go through a step of compressing it afterwards, just as long as you have access to the Creative Suite. There's a application in there called Video Encoder, or just Maya Encoder, sorry, no, it's just called the, Adobe Encoder. And using that, you can spit out a QuickTime video, and it'll be much smaller so that when you turn it in, it doesn't take up a bunch of space. Okay, so the display size you can say from window, and actually scaling, I would go ahead and dial that up to 1. If it's set to 0.5, it's going to give you a smaller video than what your screen is. So if you say scale 1, then it will render out a video as big as your viewport here, which is nice. Okay, the bottom one is basically where you want your movie to be rendered. So I'll go ahead and browse to my project folder, and so mine is located under Class Resources, ADN 411, Week 1 Ball Bounce, and then I find my folder, and I'll just put it in the Movies directory so that it's easy to find. As you can see, I have already rendered one out, but if you don't have anything in there, then nothing will be in there quite yet. So this is bounce 2. Okay, and then you just hit save. Okay, so now that you have the location of where you want to go, you can just hit Playblast. Maya will do its thing. Computer's running a little bit slow just because of the video recording software that's running over top of it. The video card can only do so much, but it's getting through it. All right, so you can see down here that it's given me a message that it's done, and then it automatically pops up the video using QuickTime because I've told it to use QuickTime to open this type of file. So if you play it back, I've got my nice little bouncy video. Cool. So if you don't have access to QuickTime, then I'll run through how you might want to do that. So over here, if this had actually been set to AVI, I'm going to go ahead and put this video just on my desktop for now, so that because I'm going to be compressing it and actually getting a different video to put in my Google Drive folder. So I don't want to directly export to my Google Drive folder so that I don't have to delete anything later. So I'll call this bounce 3. Ooh, boon bounce. Okay, and then I'll hit save and Playblast again. It's actually faster to render with AVI just because it's uncompressed, but certainly not any smaller. So it opens up using a different application because it's a different video format. And what I mean by that is here you can see that it's an AVI. So my computer opens AVIs using a different application. So now that I have that, what I mean by the fact that it's uncompressed, you can see here, if I put properties on, you can see that it's 607 megabytes. It's only 5 seconds. That's a very large file size for such a short video. So to fix that, what I like to use is here, Adobe Media Encoder, and all of you should have access to that over at school, or if you have your own copy of Adobe, then it's one of the ones that comes with just the Creative Suite subscription. All right, so I went ahead and paused the video just because it took a second to open up. And figured you didn't want to watch me just watch a program open. All right, so the window that pops up when you open Adobe Media Encoder is this one. And all you have to do is find your video, kind of the easier way of working with this. You just drag it in this window here. When you do that, it pops it in here, and you can see that this is the source file, bounce3.avi. And then these are the options that it's currently set up to export. As you can see, I've used this for rendering out an H.264, which is an MOV, like a QuickTime movie file type, often. So the options are actually already set up. But if you wanted to do it from scratch, you click on this leftmost little button, and up here, you've got a couple different options. And if you just hit H.264, and then the one that you want to, the other drop down that you want to do is clicking this one, and you can say match source medium bitrate would be plenty. And what that's going to do is seriously lower the amount of memory that is required for this file. As you can, if you remember, this was 600 megabytes, and down here it's saying the estimated file size is now only a megabyte. So you're removing basically all the extra stuff. So if you hit OK, so it says match source, medium bitrate, and then the last field is basically what you want to call it and where it's going to go. So if you click that, right now it's going to export it to my desktop as bounce3.mp4, and that looks good to me. So then all you have to do is hit play. It runs through, runs the encoder. So now it appears on my desktop. You can see that I have bounce3.mp4. If I double click that, running much better. And this file is 734 kilobytes, which is as much, much smaller than 600 megabytes. Great. So now that you have that file, I would recommend all that you do is basically drop it in the movies folder for your project. So I would locate ADN 411 animation, basic ball bounce, Kirby, movies, and then I could drop that in here. Cool. So now that I've run through all the things for just doing a basic Playblast, if you have any more questions, please feel free to email me, or and I'll be working all day on some other stuff in my computer, so I should be able to respond pretty quickly. All right. Well, thanks. Bye.